Welcome back, everyone. It's good to see you all. We are continuing our summer Bible study in the book of Genesis, and it, in my opinion, has been going great so far. We just went through the contentious story of Sodom and Gomorrah. Is found in Genesis 19, I believe. I'm trying to find where we left off. Usually I do a good job of giving myself a bookmark in the place that we left off, and I did not do so. So if anyone would help me, I think we ended mid chapter 19. Am I wrong? Does someone remember? All right, Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed, chapter 15.
Yeah, I think we were mid 19.
Yeah. I think we left off with Lot's wife becoming a pillar of salt.
That's correct. Yes.
Which, yeah. So I believe we are at verse 30 at this point. And just a bit of a just review of where we're at this point. God has a special relationship with Abraham and the people of his house. It seems that there's been, at some level, some sort of Christophany, some sort of appearance of God, even maybe God in a triune nature among these peoples. They come to Abraham. Abraham fixes them a meal. They observe the righteousness of his camp, move on to Lot's home, where there seems to be some sort of altercation among the people. Within our study, we tended to look at this as maybe some sort of confrontation between God's will and culture and the broader culture, secular culture, even if you will, of the people that were in the community that Lot was a part of. Lot was living in what's described here as a city. There may have been some sort of sexual ritual or something of that nature that was a part of the city. And Lot pleaded with the people of the community to not move on such things with his visitors. They tried to overtake them anyway, and then the city was destroyed. And Lot resettled in another smaller city nearby. And so we're picking up at chapter 19, verse 30. And let's see here. See, Mary, if you would not mind reading out, we can read 30 to the end of the chapter.
Mary Lee.
Yeah, Mary Lee, thank you. That's true. I gotta. We have two Marys here.
I used to go by Mary Lee.
That's right.
Now Lot went up out of Zoar and settled in the hills with his two daughters, for he was afraid to stay in Zoar. So he lived in a cave with his two daughters. And the firstborn said to the younger, "Our father is old, and there's not a man on earth to come into us after a manner of all the world. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, so that we may preserve offspring through our father." So they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father. He did not know when she lay down or when she rose. On the next day, the firstborn said to the younger, "Look, I lay last night with my father. Let us make him drink wine tonight also. Then you go in and lie with him, so that we may preserve offspring through our father." So they made their father drink wine that night also. And the younger rose and lay with him, and he did not know when she lay down or when she rose. Thus both the daughters of Lot became pregnant by their father. The firstborn bore a son, and his name was Moab. He is the ancestor of the Moabites to this day. The younger also bore a son and named him Ben-Ami, and he is the ancestor of the Ammonites to this day.
Important to take a pause here and recontextualize some of this. remember, we're always talking about doing this through hermeneutic scholarly framework. And in doing so, we must also understand that there's an author. Tradition would have it that the author was Moses, or somebody who wanted the authority of Moses behind it. The text itself says what it says, but the intended reader, were the Jewish people of antiquity. And so the intention here of this note, so as to say that their neighbors were born of deception, or so as to say that their enemies, found their origins in some sort of incestual, inappropriate manner, was in some ways a political statement. And it's important to, when you read this is a horrifying story. It does not speak well of Lot's character, even though, perhaps it's trying to pin all of this on his daughters. I have my doubts on that. But it's also intended to have some sort of political impact. That's my opinion looking at it.
The Moabites and the Ammonites were enemies of the Israelites?
Yes, we'll find that in later stories.
Okay.
You'll find that through Samuel. You'll find that through help me. Essentially, it was always a joke when I was in seminary. The joke was, anybody with ites at the end of their name were enemies.
All right.
So, Moabites, mosquito bites, they're all bad. but it's to kind of, what's interesting in this is that it's acknowledging a common origin, that these are people of faith that are somehow from the same family tree as the set apart people, but they're a corrupted branch of the tree, by laying out this myth of how they found their start.
I would further add that women's primary role was procreation, and that these daughters realized that it was important to keep the family line going. And unlike Hagar, who was from a different genetic line, there was an imperative. They saw it more important to preserve the genetic strain than they did to obey other social prohibitions against intergenerational incest. And so it may not be, there may or may not have been that something that was considered so terrible about this. It may have been fairly common.
That's very true. And who's to say at that time that this behavior was prohibited or frowned upon within the culture? Elizabeth?
To me, it also seems to echo, obviously, the creation story with Adam and Eve, with the woman taking on this kind of utzing or urging to do something that's potentially outside of the social norm and construct. And again, that might be our lens, and it might not be as out of bounds as Mary Lee is saying. And then the other thing I was just kind of noting with Cain and Abel, the older and the younger sibling take on these different roles. I just thought that was interesting, and I note that.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes, Inez.
The Sodom and Gomorrah, if I could go back for a moment, please. The city, I'm confused originally. Was the city Sodom or was the city Gomorrah? And the second question is, why was it so bad, the sexual relations that were going on in that city? So why did the author paint that as so bad, and yet the incest that, the father-daughter, which I understand now what you're speaking, how you're speaking about it in the context there. But it's interesting.
Yeah.
Why is it, what's going on that God destroyed. Were there two cities, Sodom and Gomorrah? I
Yes,
just
there were
don't-
two. There were two cities. I would almost say they were sister cities. Am I right in my reading of it? It's sort of like Seattle and Tacoma. You know, you gotta take them together. SeaTac, they're closely aligned and related, if you will. And Lot was on the boundary of the city. Which city? I'm uncertain. I think the text says that the two angels came to Sodom and Lot was at the gateway of Sodom. So Lot was right at the boundary of the city. And so in our reading, like in what we're doing together, is we're kind of looking at what was the original intent of the author and what it might also speak to us today. And so in our reading of this, we see that Lot has allied himself with this community. He's sidled up next to it, but he's right at the boundary's edge. He's got 1 foot in and 1 foot out, if you will. And the Lord comes and judges the cultural elements of the community that are misaligned. And Lot has to make a decision to stay or go. And he starts to plead and bargain because he really cares about this place. And it's a part of what he's done commercially and otherwise. But it becomes very clear that he can't make these compromises anymore and he must go. Further on, we see Lot once again in a very compromising situation. Once again, around sexuality and its interplay within his life. And it will have huge consequences that will result in challenges for his offspring and for people of faith that follow him. And there's sort of something there that the author is alluding to that, you know, by not being fully tapped into the community. Remember, the goal of Genesis is, at least as we're studying and as we see it, the goal here is to say that the Jewish people are to be set apart, that they're to have their community, their faith with God, and it is special and it is to be set apart from the others around them, right? And so here's Lot, this character that always wants to have 1 foot in and 1 foot out, and that has very dangerous consequences. It's almost the warning there. So that's how I see it.
Thank you.
Marilyn? Yeah.
Well, it just seems this is more about procreation than sex.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, if he's unconscious, then there was no sensuality involved. And there's an imperative to keep your people available. And the question becomes, which, you know, comes up in the New Testament and reflecting back, why is genetics so important? Why do we insist on that?
Yeah.
Because clearly Jesus stops that insistence
Yeah.
pretty quickly on.
One of the things that Jesus didn't stop was forced sex. I mean, that he did stop was forced sex and the equality and the brotherhood of people, the equality among people. They were all children of God, as opposed to some of us are children of God and the powerful are closer to God. The powerful being closer to God was the strongest belief system of people other than the Jews. That they, you know, rulers were referred to themselves as descendants of God. And that's what gave them capital rights over other people. You know, you could destroy somebody's life because God gave life, but you were descended from God. It's consistent with Sodom and Gomorrah that there was also a scientific belief that sperm were like seeds. They were completely fertilized in a sense, and that a woman was just like soil that you put the seed into. Barrenness is even the term that is used for a woman who ends up not all the seed is put into her, but she doesn't have children. And even the Greeks really proposed this idea the Old Testament talks about the evil of homosexuality and that you are spilling your seed.
Spilling your seed on the ground.
You're spilling your seed on the ground.
Oh.
On wasted, it's wasted because it's not going anywhere. And so that's where long-term relationships, were encouraged to be heterosexual. And the use of force was discouraged by the Jews as well as by Jesus. Pretty consistently, although they did have slaves and they did take up with them, it didn't turn out well. It just didn't turn out well. And
I believe
that's
it
pretty
in,
consistent with Sodom and Gomorrah, and it's consistent with this reading in the sense that you have to remember Lot's hesitation had to do with maybe earning a living and how do I practice my trade if I'm going to go live in a cave, if I'm out of a town, whatever his trade was, how does he practice it if he can't sell goods to people?
Sure.
How does he make a living? And his
Alvin?
daughter, how do they make a living if their dad dies? How do they make a living? Well, your 401k in those days were your children. Right? Your Social Security was your children. They would have starved to death because he'd taken them and put them in a tiny town. They didn't have marketable skills. And, they needed children that they would take care of, help them survive, and then the children would take care of them.
I think, there's also something here of a contrast, Rosemary, I'll get right to you, of a contrast between Abraham and Lot.
Yeah, there is.
This notion that Lot's faith had limits, the limits of his understanding, the limits of his trust in God's sufficiency to be able to provide for him. And you see in Lot this character that's trying to take these things on with his own hands. He's trying to figure it out in his own way. And you see in Abraham this character who is beatified, if you will, as one who has full faith and confidence. Even as his wife laughs at the idea that he will have an heir, Abraham is this character who still believes God said it and I believe it. And so there's this contrast between the two. Rosemary.
Yes, I'm wondering, as far as I can remember, wasn't Ruth a Moabite?
Yes,
Yes.
I think
So,
so.
yeah, so consequently, Ruth would have been involved in all of these hereditary things. Because Ruth then would, Ruth then and Boaz then had children, and they had children, and they had children, and pretty soon, you have the hereditary of Christ coming from, but that notwithstanding, in my life in criminal justice, I have heard people use this particular passage as an excuse for their behavior.
Oh boy.
Particularly men use this
Yeah.
as an excuse for their behavior. So consequently, you have to be careful about text quoting, so that you don't pull out, 2 or 3 phrases or passages and then use that, so to speak, for further than delineation of what you want to do. But I was thinking because, I remember at my wedding, we used, Ruth and Naomi, whither thou goest, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what I remembered. Anyway, that was all that I want to say.
And I mean, isn't that an astounding kind of full circle idea in the story of Christ, right? That his origins include the fullness of community, if you
And
will.
it also, the story of Ruth is also really used a lot to show that God's promise to you is fulfilled when you return to community,
Mhm.
and a community that worships the one God. Ruth is somebody who's usually held up as an example of someone who God favors, because her daughter-in-law stay with her, but she moves with them and wants to go. And there's something in the passage of Ruth where she says that's where she wants to go, that we will return. One daughter-in-law stays there, one doesn't.
Yeah.
And they return to the lands of the Jewish people. And because she does that, God looks with favor on her, and then she ends up owning fields
Yeah.
through her daughter, at least.
Yeah.
Through her daughter's marriage, which is the only way to get it.
Yeah. I mean, this is a history, and and it's got moral arc to it, but we really are reading this story that's trying to not only have something to say, but give us some insight as to the origins of,
But this is probably more mythical than historically correct.
I would lean that way.
Yeah.
There are some that don't believe that, and the tradition holds that we take this literally, but I do believe that this is gussied up.
Well, and myths exist to explain phenomena, and the phenomena that they're trying to explain is why being loyal to your family and putting God first is inherently rewarding.
And I mean, this is laced with stereotypes. The Moabites are these disorganized people, and they had this disorganized origin. It's got all these issues there.
True and factual are not the same, are not synonymous. Contains great truths that reported variously.
Don't we know that in today's age?
Right.
Let's keep going here. Genesis 20. Let's see here. Sophie, I've not heard much from you today. It's great to see you.
Thank you.
If you do me a favor, if you could read Genesis 21 through 7, and I will read 8 to the end of the chapter, and then we'll discuss.
Okay. From there, Abraham journeyed toward the region of the Negev and settled between Kadesh and Shur. While residing in Gerar as an alien, Abraham said of his wife Sarah, "She is my sister." And King Abimelech of Gerar sent and took Sarah. But God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, "You are about to die because of the woman whom you have taken, for she is a married woman." Now Abimelech had not approached her. So he said, "Lord, will you destroy an innocent people? Did he not himself say to me, 'She is my sister'? And she herself said, 'He is my brother.' I did this in the integrity of my heart and the innocence of my hands." Then God said to him in the dream, "Yes, I know that you did this in the integrity of your heart. Furthermore, it was I who kept you from sinning against me. Therefore, I did not let you touch her. Now then, return the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you shall live. But if you do not restore her, know that you shall surely die, you and all that are yours."
So Abimelech rose early in the morning and called all his servants and told them all these things. And the men were very much afraid. Then Abimelech called Abraham and said to him, "What have you done to us? How have I sinned against you that you have brought such great guilt on me and my kingdom? You have done things to me that ought not to be done." And Abimelech said to Abraham, "What were you thinking of when you did this thing?" Abraham said to him, "I did it because I thought there is no fear of God at all in this place. and they will kill me because of my wife. Besides, she is indeed my sister, the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother, and she may become my wife. And when God calls me to wander from my father's house, I said to her, this is the kindness you must do me. At every place which we come, say of me, he is my brother. Then Abimelech took sheep and oxen, and male and female slaves, and gave them to Abraham, and restored his wife Sarah to him. Abimelech said, my land is before you. Settle where it pleases you. To Sarah he said, look, I've given your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. It is your exoneration before all who are with you. You are completely vindicated. Then Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, and also healed his wife and female slaves, so that they bore children. For the Lord has closed fast all the wounds of the house of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abram's wife. Wild story. Wild story. But a little more, this is the first time in reading this, and I've always glanced over this. This is the first point in which it gives you some knowledge of how Abraham and Sarah were to come together. They grew up together, obviously. It was fine that they married. That there's some sense of some sort of community standard as to who could be married within a family. Yeah, it's the first time I ever noticed that. Slipped right on past me. Probably because I was still reeling from Lot's story. It would slip right on past me.
But in Jewish tradition, you ancestrally, you are what your mother is, not what your father is.
That's right.
So the fact that they had two different mothers
Interesting.
was the most important thing, not who the father was.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But Jewish ancestors, they determined by
The mother.
the mother.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
So there's
The mother is
the
the most important.
Al's pointing out that there's Abraham asserts that there's no prohibition on him having married Sarah because though they share a father, they don't share a mother.
I have a question.
Yes. Okay.
So it sounds like this is sort of their strategy. They go to a new place. He
Yeah.
offers Sarah to whoever the leader is as sort of a peace offering. And
Yeah.
I'm not sure I understand why that is. I mean, is it literally that? It's a way to kind of ingratiate yourself with the leader?
Well, it's trickster both times that, that they do it under false pretenses, no matter how much he tries to back it off when discovered.
Well, what we're referring to here, if you guys don't remember, earlier in Genesis, Abraham does this in Egypt. There's a famine, they go to Egypt, and here's Abraham going, well, hey, this isn't my wife, this is my sister, spare my life, take good care of me. His sister's good looking enough to where she goes straight to the top. And he's in the court of the
That's
king.
right.
And from the court of the king, he's able to say, well, hey, guess what? That's not my sister. She's actually my wife. But we've been hanging here for a while. They're nomadic people, right? We've been hanging here for a while. You've gotten to know me. We've played some canasta. We're friends now. Just let us go. It'll be okay. And then they get food and they get provisions and they've got new political connections. So yeah, it does appear to me to be his strategy.
But think how powerful his worry is about the end of others, that he should have a great wife.
Yeah.
Must have been something.
Yeah.
I'm sure she was.
Clearly
I
a
mean,
question.
these are nomadic people. I think her the key to her looks may have been teeth. I don't know. We don't know, but I'm sure she had something going for her.
All right.
Yeah. All right, let's continue. Let's get to the heart of the matter. Let's get to Isaac and all the fun. Elizabeth, if you've got your Bible, and wouldn't mind reading chapter 21. Let's do 1 through 7.
Sure. Then the Lord took note of Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had promised. So Sarah conceived and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the appointed time of which God had spoken to him. And Abraham called the name of his son, who was born to him, whom Sarah bore to him, Isaac. Then Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Now Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. And Sarah said, God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh with me. And she said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in this old age. And the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned.
All right. So here it is. She laughed, and now there's some wordplay about her, saying that laughter will be with me all the days of my life because, this great miracle has happened.
Well,
I-
Isaac means laughter.
That's right. That's right. I am 42 years old. I cannot imagine a baby of any kind being in my household, but with all the fresh new servants and slaves that Abraham has, he's got a little bit of help. And here's where the story gets interesting. From verse 9. But Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, playing with her son Isaac. So she said to Abraham, cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not inherit along with my son Isaac. The matter was very distressing to Abraham on account of his son. But God said to Abraham, do not be distressed because of the boy and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you, for it is through Isaac that offspring shall be named for you. As for the son of the slave woman, I will make a nation of him also, because he is your offspring. So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and the skin of water and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder along with the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered about the wilderness of Beersheba. We should stop there for a second. There is something alliterative here that is a part of one of the beautiful kind of almost poetic sense of the way that scripture has worked and the tradition holds it, of great things coming from people who are cast out. And so this is one of these first places that we see someone cast out. I mean, the first person cast out, obviously was Cain, right? And so we don't necessarily see it there, but this is one of the first instances of someone being cast out, but cast out with promise. But this is a terrible story. It's a story of envy. It's a story of politics. It's the story of a broken family. It's got all the juice.
Mm-hmm. So there was a time when Hagar was told that she would have a child by God, and that God had appeared to her. And that was described as the first of the Annunciation scenes. A couple chapters back. I don't think we spent much time on that. But she was told that her son would produce a multitude of descendants.
Yeah. Let me see, where was that? Let's find where this is.
Again, the morality of the time, probably this was not an unusual situation where you had, man had slaves, he had a wife, he had children by both.
Yeah.
It's a surrogacy.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting that Abraham, has this system of wheeling and dealing when it comes to his wife and his wife's sexuality. But in this instance with Hagar, he does not offer her to another home or to the comfort of any home. He gives her some food and sets her on her way to all of the challenges of the wilderness and
Which would be a
nomadic
death
life.
sentence, really.
Yeah.
So it's chapter 16, verse 7 is where
That's
it
right.
starts.
Yeah, if you've got your Bible, let's go back to that and read this for a moment, because we should reaccustom ourselves to who Hagar was. She was a part of the sign and trade deal that Abraham had in Egypt, to borrow a sports metaphor. Abraham goes to Egypt. He does the same thing that we saw in chapter 19 with his wife. He presents her as his sister. There's pox upon the house of the king of Egypt. Eventually, it's discovered the ruse that they pulled, and Abraham is given slaves and money and food and set about on his way. And Hagar was a part of that deal. And here we are in chapter 16, verse 7. I'll go ahead and read out. Let's actually start in 6. But Abraham said to Sarai, "Your slave girl is in your power. Do with her as you please." Then Sarai dealt harshly with her, and she ran away from her. So there's already, we see here, some enmity between Sarai at that time and Hagar. The angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water, referring to Hagar, in the wilderness. The spring of water on the way to Shur. And he said to Hagar, slave girl of Sarai, "Where have you come from, and where are you going?" She said, "I'm running away from my mistress Sarai." The angel of the Lord said to her, "Return to your mistress and submit to her." The angel of the Lord also said to her, "I will so greatly multiply your offspring that they cannot be counted for multitude." An angel of the Lord said to her, "Now you have conceived and shall bear a son, and you shall call him Ishmael, for the Lord has given heed to your affliction." And here we go with the political musings. "He shall be a wild ass of a man in his hand against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and he shall live at odds with all of his kin." So we see in this story the first instance of God, with the exception of Eve, maybe, God speaking directly to a woman. I believe so. We also see in this story, her having a familiarity with God. So there's this notion of that there's a relationship there. So not only has she come into the house of Abraham, but she's also adopted the faith. It's maybe appropriate to assume that because of the way that they're relating. And we see in this story a promise being made to her, not necessarily to Abraham, right? So there's the distinction there that there's something wholly new and separate that God is doing through Hagar, with Hagar, creating another community, another branch of faith.
Doesn't even mention Abraham.
Doesn't even
The
mention
father could be anybody.
Right.
this is very true. Yeah.
It doesn't say it.
Al,
Yes. Elizabeth
Can
or
you-
Shelley?
Oh.
Yeah.
can you speak to, this promise, you'll have this beautiful son and he'll be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone. Can you just put that into context for me? I think that, as a mother bearing a child, if the good Lord had told me that, Mary was submissive and took on the mantle of this and that, but can you just maybe put some context around that? How are we supposed to, when we read this, interpret that and understand that? Hey,
Well,
a wild man.
Yeah. From a hermeneutic perspective, obviously, the author is trying to say something about these descendants of Hagar, who we know to be, the Arab peoples. At least that's what tradition would hold. So for the early Israelites and Hebrew people who read this, it fulfilled their suspicions about the origins of their neighbors, the intentions of their neighbors, and what they're all about. What I always point to in this, though, is that it also points to them being your brothers. No matter what you may think of their behavior, they are a part of your community and should be accepted as such. But that's just my own political.
It's also interesting, as Rosemary pointed out, that people use passages to validate their own evil thoughts, their own will, if I guess would be the term. I'm looking at the Oxford interpretation of it, and it does say that the story of Ishmael and the story of Lot and Abraham here really talk about God saving people who are oppressed by force. And he met with Hagar because the Hebrew word that is used, Anah, A-N-A-H, means that she was dealt harshly with. That means that she was an oppressed person. And that God works in relationship with God, you're going to be less oppressed. It's going to work out for you if you call on him. And it also points out here that the larger message is that, Lot and Abraham, and Abraham's endangerment of Sarah and giving her away, for marriage, and then describing all the complications around his decision to have a child, earlier, or Sarah's decision, whether whichever storyline you're willing to buy, is putting yourself in front of God's will. If God's promised you're going to have children, that's going to happen, and God had promised that, and they just kind of thought, well, it's not working fast enough. And there's a consistent message in the Hebrew Bible that when you trust God and you have faith in God, and God has a different timeline than you, go with God's timeline.
Yeah.
I would also add to what Mary had to say that a contrarian point of view is that just because the son was to lead a life of conflict doesn't mean that his conflict was bad conflict. Maybe he was fighting for justice, right?
Yeah. But flashing forward to chapter 21, we see Hagar being cast out again from this home, but with the promise of her future with her, right?
Right.
Growing up in the Black church here in America, boy, I've heard some spellbinding sermons about, hope and hope in situations that are quite hopeless. And this character of this woman, Hagar, who believed in a future, even in the midst of a society that offers her very little. And there's something wonderful to be said there of what her faith is and who she is. That despite constantly being tossed about, not necessarily being cared for by the community that she's a part of, that there's great promise for her still, and that she has full right to relationship with God and the promise of God.
Even though it does say in here that they point out that she did look with disdain on Sarah because she was pregnant and Sarah wasn't. And that may have caused some of the difficulty in the situation. But God fulfills promise to people who call on him, even though you've made really bad mistakes. It's a pretty consistent message.
Yeah.
Most of the heroes in the Bible have done, murdered somebody, which was disdain upon a wife. I mean, they've just done all sorts of evil things.
And I
And
mean, Sarah's, willingness to cast Hagar out over inheritance just shows where her priorities
Yeah,
actually
yeah,
are.
it's not definitely
All right.
not looking at the big picture.
Yeah. Where are we here? So let's go back, chapter 21.
15.
Yeah, chapter 21, verse 15. I think we can finish up 21. We may be able to. Al Einstein, if you wouldn't mind reading out from 15 to 21, that would be great. So this is Genesis 21, verse 15.
When the water in the skin was gone, she cast the child under one of the bushes. Then she went and sat down over against him a good way off, about the distance of a bow shot. For she said, "Let me not look upon the death of the child." And as she sat over against him, the child lifted up his voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the lad. And the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the lad where he is. Arise, lift up the lad, and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make him a great nation." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. And she went and filled the skin with water, and gave the lad a drink. And God was with the lad, and he grew up, and he lived in the wilderness, and became an expert with the bow. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt. So Paran is where? I'm told of the geography. Is that of any significance?
I'm not certain of the.
No.
Who's got? Anybody got a Bible with a nice map on it? I do want to take a moment. We'll come back to Fran. I'll look this up. I do want to take a moment and note the symbolism and the symmetry of the symbolism here. We're going to get another ram in the bush moment, if you will, coming soon. So there's this moment in which the life of the child is being is in question, and the child is laid to the side, once again, with this earthy, these elements, almost ritualistically. Like I can't look upon this child, and there's almost this early burial, placed in the bushes, and yet and still, God hears the voice, and the child does grow to be strong, and there's a miracle well, whether mirage or not, living water, indeed.
This note here doesn't say anything about Paran, but it does say that this story parallels the peril that this child was in peril and almost died, and so did Isaac.
That's right.
And they're really, and I know Isaac is frequently interpreted that, this helped to end child sacrifice in that area, which was demanded in other cultures by their gods, or
That's right.
demanded by the priests who, it was probably became pretty highly politicized. But that child, after this story, these two stories, God hears the call of these children who are going to be left to die, and it's saying that that's a wrong thing to do. And God doesn't want the sacrifice of babies, of young children.
Yeah.
Alvin,
Yes.
my footnote says that he was in his late teens, based on the fact that Abraham was 86 when he was born.
Yeah, that tracks.
I thought that this was like a very young child.
Yeah, no,
Right.
it tracks. He was older. and they were given one skin of water, which, you know, there's no exact measurement there, but clearly wasn't enough for them to survive in the desert. Yeah.
Yeah,
this
they
is-
had a death sentence and they were set away from it.
Yeah. Yeah, a very young boy, you know, of this type probably would not have had any cachet to be able to, you know, get them into another community. And so, yeah, they, you know, that was awful. But, you know, it says here he became an expert with the bow. So that speaks to his ability to be able to provide for his family.
Exactly.
You know, he found a way.
Instead of taking care of sheep, he learned a new
He
skill.
becomes a hunter, right? And so we've got a little nugget of maybe some sort of transition here within culture.
Mhm.
And definitely an element of how he's a part of a different culture, right? We're talking about Abraham and Lot. They're herders. They've got, you know, they're cattlemen, if you will. And so we have this instead, this hunter, this poacher, this guy who's a survivalist, who has to find a way to make a way for himself in a different manner. Further on in the chapter here, we've got a covenant between Abraham and Abimelech, and I think that may deserve a little more time, but in an effort to keep us moving along, I would at least like to read it, and maybe we'll have an extended discussion on it starting next week. What do you guys say?
That's good.
All right. I'll go ahead and read out. This is Genesis 21, verse 22. So we're skipping on from the story of Hagar and Ishmael, and we're moving back to Abraham. 21, verse 22. At that time, Abimelech, with Phicol, the commander of his army, said to Abraham, God is with you in all that you do. Now therefore swear to me here by God that you will not deal falsely with me, or with my offspring, or with my posterity. But as I have dealt loyally with you, you will deal with me and with the land where you have resided as an alien. And Abraham said, I swear it. When Abraham complained to Abimelech about a well of water that Abimelech's servants had seized, Abimelech said, I do not know who has done this. You did not tell me, and I have not heard of it until today. So Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech, and the two men made a covenant. Abraham set apart 7 ewe lambs of the flock, and Abimelech said to Abraham, what is the meaning of these 7 ewe lambs that you have set apart? He said, these 7 ewe lambs you shall accept from my hand, in order that you may be a witness for me that I dug this well. Therefore that place is called Beersheba, because there both of them swore an oath. When they had made a covenant at Beersheba, Abimelech with Phicol, the commander of his army, left and returned to the land of the Philistines. Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba and called there on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And Abraham resided as an alien many days in the land of the Philistines. So we don't have a lot of time with this, but I see in this story, you know, more political, you know, workings with Abraham. I also see Abimelech, you know, it's almost alluded that Abimelech is sharing some level of faith with Abraham, that they are coming into some sort of covenant or faith community with one another. I'm also struck, and this is the first time I'm noticing this, by the military implications of this, right? You know, it makes note that these men have come into a covenant that also involves the use of force, and they're going out into the land of the Philistines, and Abraham is almost an early home settler. You know, he's going out, and he'll be protected by Abimelech's army and their people, but he's going out and forward and finding more land and taking it as his own. Yeah, I'll get an answer for you on where Param is, because I would like to be able to line up where did he come from that he went to Beersheba and then moved on. But it's also interesting to me that the text makes it clear that Abraham is a stranger in this land, and this land is, as the text describes it, the land of the Philistines. That Abraham is now commandeering for his own.
As the Israelites have.
I'm sure we're going to get there. I think this is a good stopping point for us for today. I don't know how you guys are feeling about it. I think we should take a moment and pray together, and we'll wrap up our time. I don't know if you guys have heard, but a beloved member of our community, David Weatherford, passed away this week. I'd be remiss if I didn't take a moment and just talk about him. I love that man so very much, and it's hard for me to process, even though he was in his late 80s. We had become very good friends because of our love of bow ties and other such ridiculous things. We were members of the Seattle Bow Tie Club together, which is Seattle's oldest hoity-toity gentleman's institution. And I had so many great memories with him, and I'm going to miss him dearly. And he's on my mind today as I come together with all of you. Pray that God gives him rest. But let's pray together. Father, we are so grateful for the blessing of community, the opportunity to come together in faith in you, and share that faith with one another. I pray that you continue to mold us and help us grow, unite us together in common cause to see your love given to the world that so desperately needs it. In Jesus' name we pray.